Hey there folks, welcome back to Succinct Psychology, aka Succinct. My name is Jaia Hendrickson, and this video is going to be a follow-up to my previous video starting out Chapter 7 in Principles of Social Psychology. One fundamental aspect of social interaction is that some individuals have more influence than others. Social power can be defined as the ability of a person to create conformity even when the people being influenced may attempt to resist those changes. Bosses have power over their workers, parents have power over their children, and more generally, you can say that those in authority have power over their subordinates. So in short, power refers to the process of social influence itself. Those who have power are those who are most able to influence others. The powerful ability of those in authority to control others was demonstrated in a remarkable set of studies performed by Stanley Milgram in 1974. Milgram was interested in understanding the factors that led people to obey the orders given by people in authority. He designed a study in which he could observe the extent to which a person who presented himself as an authority figure would be able to produce obedience, even to the extent of leading people to cause harm to others. Milgram used newspaper ads to recruit men, and in one study, women, from a wide variety of backgrounds to participate in his research. When the research participant arrived at the lab, he or she was introduced to a man whom the participant believed to be another research participant, but was actually an experimental confederate. The experimenter explained that the goal of the research was to study the effects of punishment on learning. After the participant and the confederate both consented to being in the study, the researcher explained that one of them would be the teacher and the other the learner. They were each given a slip of paper and asked to open it to indicate what it said. In fact, both of the papers read teacher, which allowed the confederate to pretend that he had been assigned to the learner role and thus to assure that the actual participant was always in the teacher position. While the research participant, now the teacher, looked on, the learner was taken into the adjoining shock room and strapped to an electrode that was used to deliver the punishment. The experimenter explained the teacher's job. The teacher's job would be to sit in the control room and read a list of word pairs to the learner. After the teacher read the list once, it would be the learner's job to remember which words went together. For instance, if the word pair was blue sofa, the teacher would say the word blue on the testing trials, and the learner would have to indicate which of the four possible words, so house, sofa, cat, or carpet, was the correct answer by pressing one of the four buttons in front of him. After the experimenter gave the teacher a sample shock, which was said to be about 45 volts, to demonstrate that the shocks were actually painful, the experiment began. The research participant first read the list of words to the learner and then began testing him on his learning. The shock panel was presented in front of the teacher and the learner was not visible in the shock room. The experimenter sat behind the teacher and explained to him that each time the learner made a mistake, the teacher was to press one of the shock switches to administer the shock. Moreover, which switch that was supposed to be pressed increased by one level with each mistake, such that each mistake required a stronger shock. Once the learner, who was of course actually an experimental confederate, was alone in the room, he unstrapped himself from the shock machine and brought out a tape recorder that he used to play pre-recorded series of responses that the teacher could hear through the wall of the other room. The teacher heard the learner say, after the first few shocks. After the next few minutes, when the shock level reached to 150 volts, the learner was heard to exclaim, "Let me out of here, I have heart trouble." As the shock reached about 270 volts, the learner's protest became more vehement, and after 300 volts, the learner proclaimed that he was not going to answer any more questions. From 330 volts and up, the learner went silent. The experimenter responded to the participants' questions at this point, if they asked any, with a scripted response indicating that they should continue reading the questions and applying increasing shocks as long as the learner did not respond. In the end, 65% of the participants continued giving the shock to the learner all the way up to 450 volts maximum, even though that shock was marked as danger, severe shock, and there had been no response heard from the participant for several trials. In some, Well over half of the men who participated had, as far as they knew, shocked another person to death, all as part of a supposed experiment on learning. So this demonstrated the influence of social power and the power of conformity when under the influence of an authority figure. In another famous, albeit notorious study, Philip Zimbardo in 1971 conducted an experiment in which he had his colleagues set up a mock prison. They selected 23 student volunteers and divided them into two groups. One group was chosen to be the prisoners. They were picked up at their home and by actual police officers and arrested and brought to the prison to be guarded by the other group of students who were also participants, and they were selected to be the guards. The two groups were placed in a setting that was designed to look like a real prison, and the role play began. The study was expected to run for 2 weeks. However, on the second day, the prisoners tried to rebel against the guards. The guards quickly moved to stop the rebellion by using psychological punishments and physical abuse. In the following days, the guards denied the prisoners food, water, and sleep, shot them with fire extinguisher sprays, threw their blankets in the dirt, and stripped them naked. On the fifth night, the experimenters witnessed the guards putting bags over the prisoners' head, chaining their legs, and marching them around. At this point, the researchers stopped the experiment early. The conclusions of the Zimbardo's research were clear. People may be so profoundly influenced by their social situation that they become cold-hearted jail masters who torture their victims. So we see here in the picture, them putting the bag over their head and then walking them with the chains. This is an actual picture. One of the most influential theories of power was developed by Bertram Raven and John French. Raven identified 5 different types of power: reward power, coercive power, legitimate power, referent power, and expert power, arguing that each type of power involves a different type of social influence and that the different types vary in terms of whether their use will create public conformity or private acceptance. Now, understanding the types of power is important because it allows us to see more clearly the many ways that people can influence others. Let's consider these 5 types of power, beginning with those that are most likely to produce public conformity only, and moving on to those that are more likely to produce private acceptance. Reward power occurs when one person is able to influence others by providing them with positive outcomes. Bosses have reward power over employees because they're able to increase employees' salary and job benefits, and teachers have reward power over students because they can assign students high marks. The variety of rewards that can be used by the powerful is almost endless and includes verbal praise or approval, the awarding of status or prestige, and even direct financial payments. Now, coercive power is power that's based on the ability to create negative outcomes for others. For instance, by bullying, intimidating, or otherwise punishing. Bosses have coercive power over employees if they're able and willing to punish employees by reducing their salary, demoting them to a lower position, embarrassing them, or firing them. And friends can coerce each other through teasing, humiliation, and ostracism. As with reward power, coercive power is effective only when the person being influenced is dependent on the power holder. So we see here in the table we have reward power, which is the ability to distribute positive or negative rewards, and then we have coercive power, which is the ability to dispense punishments. Now, whereas reward and coercive power are likely to produce public conformity, other types of power, which are not so highly focused around reward and punishment, are more likely to create changes in attitudes as well as behavior, so private acceptance. In many ways then, these sources of power are stronger because they produce real belief change. Legitimate power is power vested in those who are appointed or elected to positions of authority, so teachers, politicians, policemen, and judges. And their power is successful because members of the groups accept it as appropriate. We accept that governments can levy taxes, and that judges can decide the outcomes of court cases because we see these groups and individuals as valid parts of our society. So individuals with legitimate power can exert substantial influence on their followers. People with referent power have an ability to influence others because they can lead those others to identify with them. In this case, the person who provides the influence is A, a member of an important reference group, someone we perceive as someone we personally admire or attempt to emulate, B, a charismatic, dynamic, and persuasive leader, or C, a person who is particularly attractive or famous. A young child who mimics the opinions or behaviors of an older sibling or a famous baseball player, or a churchgoer who follows the advice of a respected church leader is influenced by referent power. Referent power generally produces private acceptance rather than public conformity. And French and Raven's final source of power is expert power. Experts have knowledge or information, and conforming to those whom we perceive to be experts is useful for making decisions about issues for which we have insufficient expertise. Expert power thus provides a type of informational influence based on the fundamental desire to obtain valid and accurate information, and where the outcome is likely to be private acceptance. Conformity to the beliefs or instructions of doctors, teachers, lawyers, and computer experts is an example of expert influence. We assume that these individuals have valid information about their areas of expertise, and we accept their opinions based on this perceived expertise, particularly if their advice seems to be successful in solving problems. So we see here in the table, we have legitimate power, which is authority that comes from a belief on the part of those being influenced that the person has a legitimate right to demand conformity. We have referent power, which is influence based on identification with, attraction to, or respect for the power holder. And then finally, we have expert power, which is power that comes from others' beliefs that the power holder possesses superior skills and abilities. Alright folks, this is going to conclude my second video covering Chapter 7 in Principles of Social Psychology. I hope you learned some good stuff, and I'll see you guys next time.